Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. There'll be a few more folks trickling in. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for a call about what's happening at a state level in response to COVID-19. I'm Karen Bassarab with the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future and the Food Policy Networks Project. And with me are other members of the Food Policy Networks Project team, Ann Palmer and Rachel Santo. And so we're all going to try and work together to facilitate and make this conversation happen. We ask that everyone that's joined the call, if you would start by muting yourselves. Everyone has joined with the video and with audio in order to be able to share what's happening in your states, share kind of what you know is going on with policy issues, ask questions as well. We have a pretty large group, so we'll try and do our best to facilitate as much conversation as possible. We are recording this call and we'll send out the recording to everyone that's registered afterward. Anne is also taking notes, and so we will send that out as well along with the chat. So this is meant to be an open conversation. Most of you, or a lot of you when you registered, submitted questions. And so we're going to start there to get things going in kind of response to what's happening in your states. If you want, if you're new to Zoom, you can use the chat function as well. So if you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can chat in responses and let us know where you're from. If you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, there's a toolbar. And on that toolbar, there should be a button for a chat box. If you go ahead and click that and open it up, and then you'll be able to share information with others that are on the call. So to start, if you would, please let us know who you are, what organization or food policy council you're with, and where you're coming from. And if you'll just chat that in the chat box so that we kind of have an idea of who's represented and where you're all coming from. So to kick things off, our first question really was about kind of how is your state coordinating food response efforts at the state level? So I'll open it up to anyone that wants to share what's going on and what they see happening in response to COVID-19 at a state level. Can also call on some people that I recognize on this call. And the first one up I see is Spencer. Spencer, do you want to talk about what's going on in West Virginia?
I somehow knew you were going to call on me. Yeah, so specifically in terms of like food policy or feeding efforts, what are you looking for specifically?
The question was pretty general. I think people are wanting to know how information is being coordinated at a state level and being disseminated. There were some specific questions around how you're engaging with your state agencies, where you're seeing gaps in the services that are being provided. We'll get into a little bit more of the policy issues in some of the later questions, but really just kind of focusing on big picture. How is relief being coordinated and getting to your communities?
Yeah, so big picture in terms of communication, the governor's holding daily briefings. They're a little all over the place. He's late a lot. He contradicts himself a lot, so people are pretty irritated. And then in terms of feeding, so our governor, I'm from West Virginia, so we have a lot of folks who really rely on school lunches, breakfast and lunch, in order to feed themselves, feed their children. And so our government has left it up to each county to figure it out. And so we have had McDowell County, which of course is our poorest county, come out swinging with the most amazing response in a matter of hours, where they're safely prepping food, cooking food with groups of volunteers and teachers and kitchen staff, and rotating cleaning crews and whatnot. They've got 114 drop sites in the county. They've got community captains. I mean, they just orchestrated this feeding effort across the whole county, like very, very quickly. And then we've got some counties who have just decided not to engage in feeding kids. We've got some counties that are only doing like one school drop site, and we're a pretty rural community. So that's become challenging for people who can't get out. There was sort of no response for feeding seniors. So the governor has currently enacted It's sort of an economic development piece to keep restaurants afloat. They're utilizing 100 restaurants across the state to do kids and senior feeding meals, but there's no delivery mechanism. We have 55 counties. That's not even 2 restaurants per county. So in terms of the policy end of things, it's not going great. In terms of government response, it's not going great. There's a crap ton of amazing grassroots response that's sort of filling in the gaps though. The concern right now from the food banks is that our 458 food pantries and feeding programs are primarily ran by people well above 60. And so those are starting to shut down. And so our response, we coordinate a group called Food for All. So it's a food policy group. We typically do state policy oriented work. It's about 6 organizations that are deeply involved, including the food banks. And so we're meeting every week, sometimes more during the week, and we're sort of monitoring the situation and providing recommendations to the governor. We've got a big letter that's probably going to go out on Friday to him, making recommendations specifically around what's happening and what's not happening, and then the additional USDA money that's about to drop in the next few days from the federal government. So that was a little long-winded, but that's what we've got going on.
That's great. Thanks, Spencer. Are there others that would like to share what's happening in terms of coordinated response at the state level in your states?
This is Jared from Carolina Farm Stewardship Association in North Carolina. And I mean, I think at the state level coordination, we're just seeing, there's kind of multiple pockets of discussion that are going on. There's, the sustainable ag community is trying to come together and have discussions about supporting producers and farmers markets and those local regional food economies. And we're seeing at the State Food Council, some efforts to bring together, the immediate food response conversation, with the support for farming conversations. But everything seems to still be pretty disparate and disconnected. And over the past 3 weeks, we've kind of come to this critical point where folks are recognizing across both North and South Carolina this need to kind of come together and really have a cohesive place to have some of these discussions and to talk about how we can support immediate needs on the ground and also document what is happening as successes both in regional food system response and in emergency feeding response, and figure out how we can use what's happening now to ask for more resources later on. So starting to think about the long game and how we can use this crisis to really make the case for local and regional food systems and resources to make them more resilient. But those conversations are just now starting to happen, and it's been 3 weeks of disparate things going on, and now people starting to finally come together and try to have a concerted type of discussion.
Thanks, Jared.
My name is Nick Tamora. I live up in Portland, Maine, but I do mostly policy research and advocacy at UNH, University of New Hampshire. Up in Portland, I think it sounds like we're seeing a lot in the state of Maine. We're seeing a lot of the same lack of policy direction at the state level, and it's left a lot of advocacy agencies, municipalities and whatnot to direct their own way forward from here, which has been really one of the great things about Portland is there is such a deeply ingrained food service industry that there's a lot going on here locally. There's a kind of ready and able workforce that has been vying for the green light on being able to create meals and pantry programs to disperse as a way of keeping them employed, but also feeding the region. There are local food hubs kind of popping up in tandem with the ones that already exist. There's also been an initiative to have people sort of offer up their land as a potential gardening space for gardening agencies in the area to produce more food right now, and then worry about the dispersion afterwards. And there's also been some work on kind of direct-to-consumer sales for things like fishermen and farmers, instead of appealing to markets, which are starting to close, unfortunately, given some concerns with protection in the workplace. There's been a lot more like direct sales as well.
Thanks, Nick.
Hi, everyone. It's Michelle Brown in Columbus, Ohio. As a state, I think we've seen a lot of leadership from our state just in our COVID-19 response in general. And of course, we have Senator Sherrod Brown, who's also a strong component of Food System Works. I know that he's anxious to learn more about what we need. And so far, a lot of those conversations have been around the emergency food system and kind of regulation around SNAP that's making it hard to get food to people, but also around what can we do around digitizing stuff like the Produce Perks program in conjunction with SNAP. So some of that's happening. It's not majorly organized. Our Ohio Food Policy Network had a webinar on farmers, farm workers, and emergency food last week. And we're continuing to work on some of our policy statements to be more ready to do the work. I would say one thing that we're definitely noticing, and probably in all of your communities, is that the cracks that we've had in our system are just getting wider. And that no matter what, even if you have a really big, emergency food system, I'm just speaking from that side of things, that there's so many people who are not getting what they need, and a lot of the policy directive is just, kind of in what I would describe as sort of a war state of everything. We're sort of somewhat militarizing, bringing in National Guard for our food bank, and then there are people who are just homebound, and there's nothing aside from people creating their own mutual aid kind of delivery system to get food to people who need it. So that's a definite crack we're seeing that we're trying to help at Local Matters, in particular where I work. And then just on the food side, I know a lot of the restaurant stuff that's happening is keeping restaurant folks employed, but we know that people who normally sell in the local food system don't have a market to sell to with institutions closed. So we'd like to see some projects that help actually buy food from people at this time, in addition to knowing that there is a lot of free food on the distribution side that we can access, even while we can't access the restaurant food. That's my complicated web starting to kick off this story.
Thanks, Michelle. See some folks from Minnesota, Michigan, California, Rhode Island. Any of you want to talk about your responses?
This is NESA Richmond. I can go if you want, from the Rhode Island Food Policy Council. I feel like the state response here is, they're doing their best. The agencies are coordinated. There are regular calls that we've been invited to, and we've been making specific recommendations on those calls, both related to the food access side and the food business side. We put together a response resource that we've been updating every day, and also wrote an open letter to the governor. Some of the specific recommendations in the letter have been picked up, and we continue to have conversations with agency folks around those. So that includes, farmers markets being designated as essential businesses. It includes the kind of connecting restaurants and restaurant workers with food pantries to support needs that are using models that I guess have been implemented in North Texas and New York. It also includes expanding some flexibility in the WIC program so that when products aren't on the shelves, people can use WIC for other products that wouldn't normally be eligible. And also expanding what is now a very small program in our state's SNAP. I guess they have a small waiver for households of only people over 60 who are SNAP recipients to be able to purchase food at select Subway restaurant shops. So to expand that to allow anyone who's a SNAP recipient and any restaurant that wants to participate. And I understand that they are applying for that waiver now. There are a bunch of other recommendations that we're working on with folks, but those are some of the big ones. I guess one other that I would mention is that we have a state grant, a small grant program, the Local Agriculture and Seafood Act grant program, which provides small grants to beginning producers and small producers. And we're trying to see if we can use that funding in a timely way to try and provide things like hand washing stations at farmers markets, farm stands, and community gardens. We'll leave it there.
Thanks, Nessa.
Hello, my name is Madeline Alcala. I am currently in Oakland, California, working for the Ecology Center in Berkeley, California. I help lead the California Alliance of Farmers Markets, which is an industry group that brings together farmers market professionals and operators to make sure that we're all operating our market safely, especially during this COVID time, and responding to it so that our markets are safe and folks are practicing social distancing. So we're all in shelter in place here in California, and because of that, a lot of our farmers markets were closed because they were considered just to be public gatherings. And so what we did at the Alliance is sent a letter of support to the California Department of Public Health to really declare like farmers markets are essential resources and services for our communities to access healthy, nutritious, dense food. And we won that, and with the support of other organizations. And even though at the state level, farmers markets are considered essential services in access points, municipalities and cities and counties are now deciding how they're going to enforce that. And so, for example, in San Diego, in LA, all the markets are closed, but up here in the Bay Area, or not all of them, but a lot of them are. And up here in the Bay Area, it's a little bit different. So we gathered a best practices guide from all the markets all across the state to say, what are you doing in your market to make sure you're following the guidelines from DPH. And we created this guidelines for all farmers markets to be able to apply and follow the guidelines, and for vendors, for customers, and for the farmer market staff. And so we're just hoping that with these resources and this information, everyone will be succinct and on the same page as far as safety during this COVID response. In Berkeley, at the Ecology Center, we have 3 Berkeley farmers markets, and they've been going really well. We have a queue outside of the farmers market. We have like only 2 entrances. We really shifted everything so that people are safe and folks are 6 feet apart, from changing the vendor, how far the vendors are from each other, maybe even having to take some vendors out to make space. So there's a lot of adjusting that's happening in real time. And I just am so grateful for the folks that are on the ground. And I just want to shout out those folks, because this work would not be possible without them.
Thanks, Madeline, and agreed very much so about people that are on the ground doing the work. Thank you.
So I'm Amy Shanafelt. I'll turn my video on while I'm talking. Hi, I'm new to, I don't know any of you. I'm from a nonprofit in Minneapolis, in North Minneapolis, called Appetite for Change. We have always used food as a tool to connect the community, and we've done community cooking classes. We have a farmer's market. We have a social enterprise catering and cafe model. And we do a bunch of youth engagement work. So right now we're kind of tossed up in the air and having to completely redo all of our programming and think about what we're able to achieve in this moment. But something really interesting going on in Minnesota that we're linked up with is called Minnesota Central Kitchen. And it kind of came together super quickly. So the organization, I believe it's just sort of independent, but it's linked up with Second Harvest, Heartland, and they're getting food through mealconnect.org, which is through Feeding America. And then we're doing prepared meals, and various sites are distributing out those meals to community. And so that initiative already got $1 million from Cargill to support the work. So in North Minneapolis, we are able to provide, right now we're starting with 500 meals a week, but we're trying to get up to 1,000 meals a week in prepared meals delivered to people's doors, or available for pickup at various sites throughout the community. So depending on people's needs. And I know there's other stuff going on in terms of connecting groups at the state level. And Appetite for Change is also leading kind of a Metro Food Justice Network that's been going on for a little while through the social gastronomy movement. And we're trying to kind of come together, but also I'm seeing some disconnects in terms of like organizations like Appetite for Change being linked up into some of the hunger relief work because it's being focused more on food shelves and food banks, and organizations like ours have always been kind of a little bit in the hunger relief, but not 100, like not technically by definition. So we're kind of trying to figure out how to get linked up into those councils and or into those kind of meetings that are happening at the hunger relief level. But I thought I would just put that out there that that's what we're doing at a small kind of nonprofit level. And we're trying to link up to all the state support that's going on. I think Minnesota's doing a pretty good job. There's others on the call that can probably speak better to the statewide efforts though. So thank you.
Thanks, Amy. I want to transition a little bit because I think this theme about kind of this disjointed, kind of bifurcated response happening. Is anyone seeing any best practices around bringing folks together at the state level? Anything that's working? I know NESA, you said that you guys have been invited to some of the state agency meetings. Kind of, are there any other practices that you're seeing at a state level that are helping to coordinate efforts?
This is Thilmany from Colorado, and I wish I was reporting what we've already done, but we were having the same challenges here with lots of great energy, passion, and initiatives popping up with little coordination. So finally, the Colorado Food Systems Advisory Council and some of its members did tap a few people on their shoulder to make sure we wouldn't be stepping on toes. And starting tomorrow, we're going to have a hourly check-in every week on a Thursday morning, and then a Slack channel developed in addition. So at least if people know they heard about something in a call or heard something was going on or feel there's a possibility they're being left out of something that touches their space, those two places feel like, you know, once a week or by checking the Slack, people at least can keep apprised. I don't know that that's going to solve us having the actual programming being any better coordinated or effective, but I think at least it allows everybody to feel like there's transparency and understanding about all the pockets of activity that are rippling up, and where there's potential to weave them together a little bit more effectively. And of course, you know, that's why I'm calling in today, is because we know beyond what we need to do at the state level, there's a couple of the battles and challenges where either another state's going to tackle it first and we can lean in and support them, or if there's a place that's right for us to support. So we're thrilled you're having this today.
Thanks, Dawn. It looks like Lauren Gwynn from Oregon was saying that they're trying to do a similar thing that you all are doing. And Stephanie Hines says that there's an emerging food security task force led by the governor's office in Minnesota that met for the first time on Monday.
This is NESA Richmond from Rhode Island Food Policy Council. Again, I'll just add that on those calls with the state agencies and with the Department of Environmental Management Agriculture Division specifically, we identified some gaps in the ways that people are being convened, and we've been working to fill those. So we have set up 3 virtual convenings over the next week or so. One is for community gardens. That's tomorrow, and it has about 40 people who've registered for it so far. The second is for shared use commercial kitchen operators and users. And the third one is about community food security and ensuring kind of a racial equity lens for the response to this crisis. And so those are virtual convenings that we're doing like this over Zoom, and they're open to our council and to everyone in the state. And I've just been working to try to get the right people on the call to provide some basic information around food safety, business opportunities, and then really using it as an open forum.
Hey, this is Lindsay from Michigan. I think my colleague Liz may have had to step away, but I'll share a few things that we're up to. We had a couple things. So Liz and our other colleague Megan coordinate. Oh, here she goes. She's writing it. Yep. Yep. So they've been coordinating a weekly call for the council, the network of food councils. And there's been folks stepping in from our senator's office, as well as some of the state agencies on those calls. So they've done a great job organizing that. And folks have asked to keep that going on a weekly basis, so all the food councils can hop onto that. And through our center, we've coordinated some information. I'll add that we have a lot of networks that we help facilitate and coordinate through the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. So like our Food Hub network has been meeting and talking about their response and how this is changing the supply chain and needs that are emerging. We have a farm to institution network that meets and farm to school, and we've been participating in, other colleagues have been participating in some of those conversations at the state level. And then we're in a process of updating our Michigan Good Food Charter. So we have kind of a cross section of folks working in like food and health in that space, as well as a few other spaces that we've been convening and working on, like really big picture vision stuff that we have sort of shifted to hold space for folks to talk about how this is changing priorities and kind of looking at what the urgent needs are all the way through to some still holding on to some of those like longer systemic changes that need to take place that this, as others have said, crisis really has highlighted and elevated at an urgent level. Some things we're up to.
Thanks, Lindsay. Paul with the California Food and Farm Network shared that they're having regular ad hoc calls with the head of the California Department of Food and Agriculture and people in the governor's office, and that they're doing town hall meetings with state elected officials and a state senator that leads on ag and hunger issues.
Hi, this is Christy Gabbard from the Chesapeake Foodshed Network and the Virginia Food System Council. And I just wanted to share one tool that our state agencies, Virginia Cooperative Extension and the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services and others have been working on actually for quite some time. And now they're using to connect buyers and producers in our state. It's a virtual, it's an online, it's called the Market Maker, and I'll put it in the chat box, but I think it's it's been a tool that actually they're having a meeting right now, a Zoom meeting right now to promote this tool and to work with folks to train them on it. And it's a way to connect, again, the buyers and the producers across the state right now that need product and those that have it or will have it.
That's great. Thanks, Christy. So there's other kind of thoughts that pop into your head about things that are working really well in coordinated responses. Please feel free to chat them in, or questions that you have, please feel free to chat them in. We wanted to move a little bit more into kind of some of the policy discussions about, what are gaps in policies that you're seeing in your states that have made it most difficult to adjust to this situation? What are the policy challenges that you're having?
This is Paul. It's, I think, actually both a state and federal issue and from the California side, but it's, the lack of direct cash that's available for, as more and more flow into the emergency food system and the need, we're going to see, I forget what the latest estimates are, but, 20% more folks on CalFresh on SNAP here in this state. And the recognition that with that flow, our food bank system, food closet pantry system, as well as the school food system running on the summer feeding program at this point, mostly work with kind of large outside retailers and distributors, and have actually really been undercutting even some previous purchasing in local food markets. And given that they end up resorting to more sort of commodity purchasing, trying to figure out how to augment with some state and federal funding to actually do those direct purchases, in our regional food system. We just don't have, those systems don't have enough direct cash dollars to do that purchasing. And a lot of our local food hubs and distributors are really struggling in this moment because of closed restaurant accounts, corporate accounts. A lot of the folks, at least in California, that supported, big tech companies have seen 60, 70% of their business cut. And those were the folks propping up a lot of the smaller farmers in the state. And so how are we fixing that distribution challenge and actually getting cash directly to them and then supporting our emergency food system? And, California's probably luckier than some states. We have more cash on hand to be able to do things like that, but it's still not nearly enough. And the question is whether enough, the federal aid that's coming down will be able to support enough of those challenges. And then I would say we've had a lot more folks shift on the agricultural side, which is where I tend to be more comfortable, shift to more of needing, to use their CalFresh and SNAP benefits online as more folks have moved to online systems. And that's been a challenge for a lot of our farmers, where they're having to shift to digital platforms, which they've never used before for direct marketing, and having to then accept SNAP benefits, which many of them have never had to do digitally before either. And many of those systems are very fraught. And so trying to expedite folks getting FNS numbers. I had 5 farmers ask me this morning about how to get FNS numbers they've never gotten before, how to expedite that. It's usually at least a month-long process for them. And then actually how do we then facilitate some of the purchasing with them, with more folks now on CalFresh, on SNAP. So I think those are some of the challenges we're trying to get at least our state agencies, in this case CDFA and CDSS, to help actually act as advocates to do what they can on their end, but then also act as advocates at the federal level to facilitate more of that happening. But at the end of the day, it often just comes back to sheer cash. We need more cash in the economy to purchase from folks to get the types of food we'd like to keep invested in our local economies rather than sending it elsewhere.
Thanks, Paul.
This is Pam from New Mexico. If I can chime in too. Number one, I want to thank everybody on this call and your colleagues and friends and families who are leaping in to mitigate the situation and take care of each other, and also see this as a potential to find new ways to create market opportunities as well as taking care of our communities. So many thanks from New Mexico. I just got off, 2 calls. So yesterday we spent our New Mexico Food and Agriculture Policy Council, very much epicenter to many of the things that you all brought up. We are definitely focused with the governor's office on very specific needs. We have agencies at the table: Aging and Long-Term Services, Department of Health, Public Education, Department of Agriculture, along with the organizations across the state that are working from that farmer level to those who eat. And so one of the things that might be additional to what I've heard here, our agencies are really connecting directly with us, probably because of the work that we've been doing for a long time around like Farm to School. Now we're doing Farm to Senior programs. They have actively been asking us to coordinate to find food. The second aspect of that is between last week and this week, our Aging and Long-Term Services now has been able to tap federal funding to be able to purchase food. As far as I'm concerned, that's a really big option for us here in New Mexico. And part of then the work that we're doing is coordinating with statewide organizations like the New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association that has a statewide value chain coordinator to actually see if we can coordinate local produce into some of the emergency but also senior meal programs, which are being now home delivered. So those are a couple of things. And I think to the question, I mean, part of that hopefully answers some of that question of also tapping into federal resources more directly as a state. And at the local level, I just got off our call with our city, Santa Fe City and County Food Policy Council. And we are developing with our county a mapping process that will map aggregation, distribution, transportation, not only at the local level, but regional and statewide level. And we have GPS folks at the table to work with us on that as well. So a couple of things to add. One thing that I feel is kind of I want to say cautionary, because everything's ramping up so quickly. We also had our emergency services person on the phone with us today, National Guard services on the phone with us yesterday, to learn more about FEMA and all the other approaches to emergency that we need to be not only aware of, but coordinating with. And at the same time, what are some of the policy issues that are coming up? And part of our role is to help people understand where policy from that federal to state to local level are shifting so that we have more flexibility in our systems as well. So it's kind of where we're at here in New Mexico in part. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Pam. Are there other large gaps that folks are seeing in policies that have made it difficult to adjust to the situation?
One thing that just came to mind, I'm not sure is a gap in policy so much as a gap in awareness, is the days of the month in which SNAP is dispensed for some folks, and when grocery stores become particularly stressed on those dates. It's different from state to state is what I understand. I know in Maine it's middle of the month, but for a lot of people it's happening right now. And there aren't, I don't think, provisions in emergency food planning to kind of capture that anxiety and that worry for people. So there's like the food justice issue there, pretty imminent.
Thanks, Nick. So that kind of raises a question in terms of, we know that there are some nationwide waivers that have been issued by USDA around some of these programs. Are there other waivers in addition to kind of the nationwide ones that your states are applying for to make things easier in your response to emergency food or to support your communities? Sorry, I just got a note that was really quiet, but the question was, we know that there are some nationwide waivers that are available through USDA. Are there others that your states are considering applying for that are outside of the nationwide waivers? Make it easier to coordinate your responses.
This is Jim from Portland, Maine, Cumberland County Food Security Council. For example, in Portland Schools is implementing as many of the school nutrition waivers as possible, doing kind of the summer food service model. And despite that, we're serving a similar number of kids that we serve in the summer. So about 20% of kids that get school meals during the school year are being served currently. The biggest jumps were the days we distributed technology to the students and the days we distributed some of the curriculum materials early on in the process. So at this point, kids aren't being fed. We anticipate it's going to grow gradually as families run out of money and they need those meals, but it's still hard because many of them are existent. There's about a dozen, or maybe, I think it's probably more like 9 or 10 distribution sites in our city, which is fewer than the number of schools even. And it's just really hard trying to figure out how to get those meals to the kids. One of the things, we have a program called the Locker Project, which distributes charitable food during the school year. And we're trying to funnel some money to them to purchase basics that are still available from our local farmers, like potatoes, carrots, onions, and things that can be distributed to those families. At the same time, the meals are being distributed, as well as trying to get into the communities, some of the concentrated housing communities where there are a number of people distributing food that way as well. So, you know, we have been having a lot of conversations among the charitable food providers, emergency food providers, about kind of meeting the need. And it seems at the moment, there's a glut of food. We have big businesses like L doing 10,000 boxes of non-perishable food a week, mobilizing their workforce. that'd be distributed through our one statewide food bank. And so that's ready to go. It's just a matter of getting it to the families that really need it. And what is a system to do that? I was multitasking on the first part of this call with the Somali Bantu Community Association, which is having a really hard time closing their office because there's so many people in need in Lewiston, Maine, coming to the office, showing up, help me with my my workers' comp, help me, with my landlord. And, we have a few people with limited capacity in that office trying to do it. And we pretty much had to pull the community leader, Muhyiddin, out of the office. And so you can't be meeting people face to face. This all has to be done virtually or on phone. So there's a lot of need out there. And we're just trying to figure out how do we make those connections. On the web, we have a lot of information. We're serving as a clearinghouse, where people need to go to get some of the services, but a lot of people don't have access to that. People most in need probably don't have access to that information. So we're trying to sort through all that, and we anticipate it's going to get harder for a lot of families before we see the end of this. And looking for advice for other communities, what you're doing to reach the people most in need.
I'll just add to that in terms of a waiver that I heard this afternoon that our State Department of Human Services is trying to implement a federal option called PEBT, which would allow them to provide SNAP benefits in the amount of the value of the school meals that kids who are eligible for free and reduced price meals get on a SNAP EBT card. Whether or not that's you can do that, whether or not the family is currently eligible for SNAP. So they're looking into that. So that would be something in addition to the grab and go options that the school districts are providing. And I don't know if that's a federal waiver, but it sounds like it's something akin to that.
Even though it's a bit of a pivot, this is Dawn from Colorado. On the opposite side, I already saw someone put this in the text box, and there's been a number of emails in a flurry this morning. There's several economic assistance packages. If people aren't aware, get familiar with the unemployment insurance changes. Beyond extending the unemployment term people can get funding under, they, for the first time ever, made contractors eligible for those. So if you work with an organization that has had to employ people as 1099s or as contractors, even as your delivery people, those are newly eligible for the first time ever and may affect some of your farm and food businesses. The other thing that some people aren't aware of is there's work share programs where if some of your food businesses felt they had to really significantly decrease their payroll, but want to keep people what they call as attached to their business, they could use people as little as like 5 hours a week. But if they were worried about those people being eligible for unemployment, they would still get prorated unemployment above and beyond the hours they can keep them. So some businesses are trying to keep some amount of activity going, but just can't afford their full payroll. They won't be hurting their employees by keeping them attached, because the employees would be eligible for the amount of unemployment still above and beyond the hours they can get employed. And that's new, I think, at least to me. And then the other thing you saw last week in our shop try to help with this is, like, for the first time in forever, local foods is supposed to get part of the USDA payout. It is still absolutely unclear to us how that's gonna flow, and we're trying to be very pestersome about it. But it was our assumption when we framed that study the way we did, that those food businesses that were more like independent businesses, like people who may be doing a bakery in your area, or a food hub, which would have a legal organizational structure that wasn't a farm, would be eligible for some of the small business grants that got approved. There seems to be some contention where small business is trying to say if something is affiliated with farms or foods, it's not eligible. I think some of the others of you are also on that email chain that's going around. that is something I didn't even expect would be a problem, but that looks like something maybe we want to look at too, because if you're not aware, there's some very useful programs that we thought the food community would be eligible for from small business, which again, will prioritize those businesses who try to keep their workers on payroll, which is going to affect a lot of our stakeholders, and would actually cover that payroll for a few months with what looks like a loan, but it's a fully forgivable loan if you in fact keep those people on payroll. So these are all new programs to me too as an economist, but they're things I think our community's not generally paid attention to and might all of a sudden become very relevant. And again, if a subset of states who are nerdy like me and think about the economics of things want to do a little task force that kind of gets to the bottom of that, I know some of our policy partners are already doing it. I think that's going to be a space that's going to be more complicated, but really far more impactful than we usually think about, at least in my shop.
Thanks, Dawn. Can you let everyone know kind of where you're seeing these conversations flowing around?
Well, you all know there's about what, 23 listservs out there that talk about different parts of food. So I haven't even been tracking, but what maybe I'll suggest to that, if a few people who are interested in those geeky economic development aspects of this want to put their names in the box, I'll collect them and I'll see if something happens in that space, if I can get a subgroup of us together who think hard about them. Is that a useful way to handle it?
Dawn, this is Jared at CFSA. I think, National Sustainable Ag Coalition is leading several of those conversations. But yeah, CFSA would definitely like to be on that list.
Well, yeah, and NSACs who tapped us on the shoulder first, we of course are in academia, so we always had to be careful about how deeply we go into policy. But again, if they could have just a subset of people who are, I think North Carolina was the first one to maybe raise it in the listservs, a subset of us who are willing to be the people who think hard with them about it. I think that just narrows down to them how many people they have to interact with that can help them start addressing these issues. Sorry if I made it too complicated.
This is Pam in New Mexico. Just to follow up on Dawn, what you were sharing. Yes, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition is definitely focusing on this, and Wes King is helping circulate a letter from, it's a letter from Congresswoman Pingree and to be co-signed, and several other congresswomen and men are on that letter, asking to create more clarification, as Dawn just brought up, around the USDA options for farmers markets and local food initiatives. And so that letter's circulating right now, and I can forward, maybe Karen, I can forward it to you and then share, but it's on a string, so you'll see everybody's string. But it is really critical for us to get our congressional leadership to sign on to that now, if possible, to really create that clarity. And that will help from the federal level to the state level, guide those funds in an appropriate manner so that they get to where they need to be. And that was a very critical change when that bill passed last week, from one day to the next early morning when it passed. Some of those provisions were not in that bill within probably 12 hours of the time it passed. So I really want to thank the organizations that were on the front line to push for our requests. And NSAC being really central to a lot of that.
Thanks, Pam. And just to let everyone know, we're also looking to convene a conversation with NSAC and Feeding America next Friday to talk about what's happening at the federal level and the impact
Monday.
of local levels. Say it again, Monday, sorry, Monday. Oops. Thanks, Rachel. And then to follow up just on the Small Business Administration, it looks like the Wallace Center is hopefully going to try and convene a webinar around the loan programs that are coming out of the Small Business Administration and I guess how they apply to food systems and farm work. I don't think the date's set for that yet.
Karen, there's a question about SNAP Online. If anyone's working on that, New York just said that they were able to set that up. Hunter College talked about that. Didn't know if anyone else was.
This is Amy Boddicker Baskes in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm multitasking listening to this webinar and our governor's press conference. Apparently the governor in Ohio has just allowed for a provision for SNAP Online. So I'm not entirely sure the details of that yet, but apparently Ohio is now in that game as of like 7 minutes ago.
Thanks, Amy. That is real-time information.
This is Robin Lamott Sparks with End Hunger Connecticut. We had a conversation actually today about the online EBT, and our state, USDA has put out that people can apply to start doing it as a state, and our state is going to, but it will take 3 to 4 months, he said, to set it up, because our online, the person who actually processes all the EBT can't do it that quickly. So it's not going to be something that can happen right away. And I know that's the case in a number of other states as well. So that I think is one of the big drawbacks right now, because it can't be done as quickly as we'd like it to be.
Part of the question was, do you know if there's any anyone working on a national level on helping states to get set up for online SNAP or to apply for waivers for it?
I know FRAC is actually really pushing for that to become a national program instead of it being by state, but every state has a different contractor or group that is actually working on the technology part. And I think that's one of the drawbacks. And I know some states right now, Amazon, like some of the bigger box stores kind of can do it more quickly, but then you're not keeping the money in your state. And whether or not they can deliver is a whole nother issue. So I think it's very state specific, but I know that as a national movement, FRAC has been really pushing to let's get this waiver going nationally.
And it is a long process. USDA has to be open to receiving the waivers, which sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. I would imagine given everything that's going on right now, they're probably not. And in the case of Ohio, it's important to point out that you can't make the purchases online. You can order online, but you still have to physically show up at the store and swipe your card. So it removes a little bit of the barrier, but not the physical presence barrier at the point of purchase.
Thanks, Ben. So one of the other questions that kind of, and some of you have touched on this a little bit, is I think, and others are interested to know, is what recommendations are you putting forward to your governors, to your state agencies that would help with the response to COVID? And what recommendations are your councils making? What are you putting forward? And Winton, I'm going to call on you because I know you guys have a set of recommendations that you've been putting out. If you wouldn't mind sharing.
Sure, and I'm sorry, I've got another conference call I've got to go jump on in 3 minutes. But so the collaborative has been hosting a lot of Zoom calls, and as we all have been. And we try to summarize them in the form of policy recommendations that we then share with the Food System Caucus in the legislature and with administration officials as well. So that's been our primary activity for the last 3 weeks, is trying to sort of sum up what we're hearing from the farming world and from the food access world, from fisheries, et cetera. And we've developed, like most of you have, a resource page on our website that lists a lot of different policy documents that are coming out, but especially ours. So if you take a look at mafoodsystem.org, towards the bottom on the left, I think there's a link to the COVID-19 resource page, and there is, you'll see one of the top resources is the food system policy recommendations from us, and another is explicitly farm agricultural resources, policy recommendations from us. So we're continuing to do those calls. Some of them have been sectoral focused, where we've had the chairs of the Ag Committee on and committed to sitting and listening to us for an hour and bringing in lots of organizational leaders for that. We've had calls of to coordinate with local food policy councils around the state. And then we've had these larger virtual forums of people from all different sectors. As much as I've always been resistant to Zoom, we're getting used to it, and I think it's really helping to connect people.
Thanks, Winton, and thanks for giving us a rundown before you have to hop off. And also thanks to Brittany for posting the link to the recommendations as well.
Karen, there's a really interesting question from Nicole Sugerman at NESA. I'm curious if anyone is working on ensuring farm workers are able to receive PPE this season. I've received a few inquiries about that and haven't known how to address this, best address this potential issue.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I'd be curious if anyone has any ideas.
I'm going to take that silence as a no. Which raises a good point of what can be done then. Are there any suggestions of organizations or any sources to reach out to, any relationships that would be useful in making sure that farm workers are able to receive personal protective equipment?
I'll say personally, I was going to reach out to some local, farm worker and immigrant advocacy organizations in our region. But I just wanted to see if it was part of, I'd say I guess we should just make sure there's coordination and make sure that people are including farm worker issues as part of their overall policy platforms. And I'm happy to share back anything I find to this list if anyone else is working on it in the kind of immigrant advocacy space.
Thanks, Nicole. That'd be helpful. It would also be good to hear kind of what other recommendations people are putting forward in terms of protections or support for farm workers.
I will mention we did hear of some mutual aid networks that are starting to encourage individuals who are paid via salary and maybe aren't going to be economically suffering as hard right now. There are some relief funds and other mutual aid funds that some councils and other organizations are starting to support. So that could be something that it's not a policy recommendation, but it is something I've seen sprouting up.
Warren Gwen in Oregon says that they're working on an Oregon Workers Relief Fund. Are there other recommendations that folks have been putting forward to their governors that they want to share?
Again, this is Dawn from Colorado. Sorry, I'm talking so much. Has there been anyone who's, because in our state, and I think most states, ag and food supply chains were called essential workers. Has anyone been working on anything about childcare access for those who now don't have their children perhaps going to schools or childcare centers, but who are being required to go to work if they don't? I know there's been better protections about if someone is COVID affected and needs to stay home for sick relatives and family members, but I didn't know if anyone's been doing anything on what childcare is available for people who are still having to go to work. Because again, our food supply chain seems to have a relatively high set of those.
This is NESA. That is one of the recommendations that we made in our open letter to the governor for food workers and farm workers. And I spoke with the director of the Division of Agriculture about classifying them as Tier 2 workers to receive free child care earlier today. So that's as far as it's gotten. that's my understanding, is that that's the classification tier 2 to receive the free child care, and that our state is working to expand free child care access to tier 2 workers of all types at this point. So
I was trying to see, I know in Maryland, they've set up an essential child care service for essential workers. I was trying to see where food service workers fell in the declaration, and the state's paying for individual child care centers to transition to serve essential personnel.
This is Beth Spittler with the California Food and Farming Network. Thanks so much, everybody, for sharing the important work you're doing. And I haven't been central to work around farm workers, but I did want to mention that I heard yesterday that there will be some efforts to, and I mean, I think they're continuing efforts, but efforts around the forced stimulus package and farm worker protections in particular. But the focus that I keep hearing is more on access to healthcare and other protections versus personal protective equipment. Of course, that might change as hopefully we have better supplies going forward, but I think the concern right now is that if there was a requirement, for instance, it would be impossible to meet it since there's so few PPE available for the healthcare sector. So I know that folks are organizing around the fourth stimulus package, and if I learn more or have something actually to share, I can share it with the list.
Thanks, Beth. So there were a couple of other questions that we had submitted during registration. One question was around kind of, are your groups collecting any data right now to understand kind of food security access issues, and how are they collecting it and what's being collected?
So this is Amy from Appetite for Change again. I just wanted to say we're not really collecting any data necessarily, but we've been trying to do a lot of outreach to our community in North Minneapolis. And one of the things we heard right away was, you know, we had this like really aggressive effort of like, we want to know what you need. And we put it out there, and a lot of people were kind of like, we don't know what we need yet. So I think like just giving it some time is what we feel like we've been hearing. Give it some time. People really, in the immediate sense, needed information about eligibility for unemployment and how to apply. So we just kind of covered that base. And then in terms of food needs, we're kind of waiting and letting people come to us with that information.
So thinking a little bit broader, another question that was asked just in your responses, kind of how do we stick to commitments to diversity, equity, racial equity, and inclusion in our practices and our response to this crisis? Anyone been grappling with how we continue to make sure that we are upholding these commitments?
This is NESA. As I mentioned before, we're holding a a Zoom for people who want to discuss this in our state. And that's all we've done so far, is try and create a space for the conversation to happen and for the people who are thinking about how to make it happen to convene with each other. And then we'll see what happens on that call in terms of recommendations or actions that come out of it.
Hi, this is Joy Gary from the Boston Food Access Council. I think one of the things that we have been doing is making sure that we're keeping the community in not just in mind, but in the conversation. And so we have been connecting with local councils, community councils, and seeing what the needs are on the ground, and have also made sure that we were deeply connected with our local officials, so that as they're getting requests, they will keep us on the list of who they're funneling it to see, so that if we're having information or resources, then we can disseminate it. But generally, a lot of what's happening in Boston is kind of disjointed, as has been echoed several times from all of you. But I think what we're trying to do, at least over the past couple of weeks, is figure out how can we be more collective, because that's the main problem with our system, is it's so brittle and it's also so disjointed. So we're trying to figure out ways to bring it together. But yeah, that's how we've been keeping people in the loop, is just keeping the people who are having the lived experience in the loop of what's happening and asking them what they actually need.
Yeah, this is Amy Shanafelt one more time. I just wanted to add, this is actually, my husband is an executive director for a neighborhood association in Minneapolis, and they put together a really unique way of connecting neighbors to neighbors. They did mailers, they did flyers at every door in the neighborhood, and they set up regional leads. And so there's people's numbers, like if you are on this block, this is your lead. And so people have a number they can call when they have a need, and then that regional lead connects back to the neighborhood association and gets the resources to kind of connect those dots. And so I thought that was really unique, just finding neighbors who are willing to step up and play that role as like a regional lead to help neighbors, because a lot of people want to help right now, but they don't really know how.
Thanks, Amy. So one of the suggestions that's been put forward a couple times is kind of if there's anything that could be done to compile policies and best practices states are doing that would be helpful. Does anyone know of any organizations or entities that are already doing this?
NESA is in like a ad hoc way for the Northeast region only, but I'd be happy to just pass that on to you. You guys have really organized documents.
Thanks, Nicole. We know that the National Governors Association is tracking all the guidances, announcements, issuances that are going out from the states, and that the National Conference of State Legislatures is also tracking bills that are being proposed in response to COVID, but both of those are very broad and not very specific to food systems. So, one of our questions is, would it be helpful for someone to be tracking state legislation and best practices and compiling that related to food systems?
This is Dawn. I guess I think I've seen a sheet moving around from FRAC maybe. Sorry if I'm getting who's originating these things wrong, that had tabs for a lot of things. What I felt like was maybe they're missing or not compiled by topic areas in an effective way for me to at least capture them is policy. But maybe again, it's me not navigating that spreadsheet enough, or maybe people don't know what I mean by that spreadsheet. But again, this is I'm just too old for how fast all this is moving. I've had to go from a 6-month planning horizon to a 48-hour one. So, you know, I think all of this is just about knowing everyone's bandwidth is so tight right now, and the quickest, most well-formulated one-stop shops for resources as we're trying to build cases in our state would just be so valuable right now.
Yeah, we hear that. Thanks, Dawn. We'll check out FRAC sheet and see what it says and see if we can add to it. I think one of the things that internally we've been talking about is there a way that we can start to bring some of these national organizations together so that there's a better coordinated response across national entities. Because just like you, we're seeing lots of information flying across lots of listservs, and it's pretty overwhelming.
Karen, I also just wanted to bring up, Phil made a really good comment about this was focused back on equity, but focusing and advocating for impacted food workers is a great way to lift up equity. So just as a, like more of an immediate step, recognizing that some of this is going to be longer term.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks, Phil.
And I'll also make a plug that if your state council or other entity is coming up with policy recommendations, I know we have a few, we have Massachusetts and we have Rhode Island's right now, but if you have others, please share them with us because we can at least include them in our very limited, I recognize, Google spreadsheet that we've started just to try to share resources we're seeing flying around our listservs. It's a lot to keep up with, but we would love to be able to share out more, and we've only seen examples from 2 states so far. So I'm sure others are doing it and we just can't keep up with it all. So if you have them, please send them along if you'd like them to be shared out. Thanks.
And just one other question. We started the state listserv, and I think a lot of you are not on it, as a way for states to start communicating about policy that's happening at the state level. Would it be helpful to convene a call with state groups again in a couple of weeks? You guys feel like your Zoom called out? Kind of how best do we support your work at a state level, knowing that there are still questions and people are trying to figure out what's the best strategy within their states right now too? Lindsay says maybe monthly.
Anybody else for the monthly frequency?
Yeah, I think monthly sounds good, and probably at that point getting some want to do, but maybe just 5 minutes on kind of the buckets that we know of that are statewide applicable, and then helping, I guess, states just organize both at the statewide level and the local council level, just resources to do that, since there are so many channels. Kind of keeping those channels slightly clear and slightly, focused could be helpful.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Michelle. So we'll look, it sounds like we'll look to maybe 2 weeks to hold a space for states to gather and convene. We'll try and kind of see about where policies, who's collecting them live, and try to send that out to folks as well.